My name is Rowan Hale, and at 30 years old, I finally heard the words that should have broken me years ago, but instead, they just shattered the illusion I still held onto. The truth is, I'd prepared for a painful night, but nothing prepares you for the sheer malice of your own mother, delivered with a smile brighter than the chandeliers she fought so hard to afford. I was standing in her newly renovated palace, the Ridgeway Estate, the place that had always felt like a beautiful, gilded cage, and she looked me up and down like a piece of dirt stuck to her designer shoe. The music, the laughter, the polite clinking of champagne glasses, it all stopped for me. It all stopped for the brutal, ugly truth she was about to deliver. "You're not even fit to shine her shoes," she said, her voice cutting through the laughter like a shard of broken glass. She was smiling when she said it, smiling, as if kindness was something she could perform, like one of the tacky ballroom dances she loved. That specific, tight, perfect smile, the one she used when she wanted to demolish someone without raising her voice. She was referring to Ara, the woman whose hand was warm and steady in mine, the woman who deserved none of this. For a second, a fleeting, sick second, I almost swallowed it. I almost let the humiliation burn itself out, just like I always did when I was a kid trying to survive her constant judgment. But standing there, 5 years after I walked away, 5 years after I built a life that had nothing to do with her debt or her lies, something inside me finally, violently, broke. I looked straight at her. Margaret Hale, my mother, the architect of a kingdom built on guilt, standing there in a pearl necklace that caught the light like captive stars, moving through her guests like she owned the very air they breathed. And I decided I wasn't going to save her from the truth this time. I wasn't going to be her compliant, debt-ridden son anymore. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of lilies and money, and I replied, "Then ask her to pay your bills." The entire room froze. Forks paused midair. The perfect, rehearsed laughter died. The silence was so profound it felt like the earth itself had stopped spinning, waiting for the fallout. My sister Sienna's smile died mid-breath, her face turning pale. She was crushing the silver gift box she was holding, her hand tightening around it in sheer, terrified panic. My mother's eyes flickered, not with shame, but with sheer, white-hot rage, and that's when I finally, truly realized what my father's death had always hinted at. That family doesn't always bleed love. Sometimes it bleeds debt, silence, and the kind of vicious lies that keep a woman in control. Before I tell you exactly why I was back, and why her financial life was still entangled with mine, years after I left the whole miserable, ugly story, I'd love to know you're here with me. Just say hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It means more than you think to know someone is out there listening, someone who understands the difference between family and captivity. And if stories like mine make you feel something or remind you that you're not alone in your own battles, please hit subscribe. Thank you. I'm Rowan Hale, and this is how one miserable dinner shattered everything I thought I knew about the so-called family legacy. I had stayed away for 5 years. 5 years of relative peace. Enough time for the paint to crack behind the dusty family portraits and for my mother to refine her new, flawless version of life without the shame of her eldest son. The night I walked back into that mausoleum, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown tired of rooms that tried too hard to look like they mattered. Ara's hand was steady in mine, grounding me, and she smiled the way she always did before walking into something she didn't deserve to be judged for. "Just breathe," she whispered, a simple instruction that felt monumental given the anxiety radiating from the marble floors. My mother, Margaret, moved like a predator, her pearl necklace gleaming. She spotted me, and her greeting was calculated, frigid. "Rowan, you came." She greeted me the way people greet an old debt that suddenly reappears on their doorstep. "I came for Sienna." My little sister's birthday was my last, desperate chance to believe that family still meant something other than liability. Sienna rushed to hug me, quick, polite, and almost real. Her fiancé stood beside her, a man my mother had vetted, certified, and officially declared a good match. Introductions passed like cold wine, flat and quickly forgotten. Then all eyes turned to Ara. "This is Ara Knox," I said, trying to infuse warmth into the frigid air. "She's a designer." Ara finished the introduction with quiet, devastating confidence, offering her hand. "I specialize in restoring old homes, especially ones with history." My mother's smile didn't even attempt to reach her eyes. "How charming," she purred. "You must love projects like this one." The words were soft, but they carried a stinging contempt that only I could truly hear. A reminder that she considered Ara, and by extension me, a low-grade repair job. Dinner unfolded like a slow, excruciating performance. Polished laughter, champagne, small talk about foundations and investments, every word designed to exclude anyone outside that brittle circle. Ara tried to blend in, quiet and dignified, but my mother was relentless. "So," she said, slicing her steak as if cutting through the last shred of civility, "your firm must be modestly sized." Ara nodded, unflappable. "It's small but honest work." My mother echoed the word, drawing it out like a stain. Honesty. Rare in this world. Her gaze then slid to me, hard and accusing. "Your father used to say that before his debts nearly drowned us." The table went quiet. My chest tightened with the familiar shame, and I caught Sienna's nervous glance, the one that screamed, "Don't make this worse." So I kept eating, forcing a smile. But my mother, the monster of the hour, wasn't done. She raised her glass, not to me, but pointedly to Sienna. "To my daughter, who knows her worth, and to the man smart enough to see it." The guests applauded. My hand froze midair. Ara lowered her eyes, a gesture of quiet defeat that felt like a knife in my gut. I had to get out. I stepped onto the balcony, supposedly to take a call. The Denver ridge lights glittered in the sharp, dry night, looking like a distant, better life that might have been mine if I had just stayed away forever. I noticed a crack running along the balcony door's edge, barely visible, but deep, like the foundation of the house, like the foundation of us. When I returned, the music had softened, but my mother's laughter filled the room again, light and poisonous. I sat down. Ara's hand brushed mine under the table, a grounding force just before the final blow. Then it happened. "She's not from your world, Rowan," my mother said, loud enough for everyone to hear, delivering her verdict, her final arrogant judgment. "You're not even fit to shine her shoes." That was the precise moment the calm snapped into a perfect, furious clarity. The kingdom she had built was nothing but a stack of cards resting on a shaky mountain of debt, and I was holding the match. "Then ask her to pay your bills." The sound of the words, flat and final, echoed the shame and rage of 5 years of silence. Nobody moved. I stood up, took Ara's hand, and walked out. As we left, I saw the edge of that gift box in Sienna's hand tear slightly, revealing a thick, official envelope inside, marked with the Hale construction seal. The sickening realization hit me like a physical blow. If my mother truly didn't need me, if she was so superior, why was my name still on every bill in that rotting house? My rage was quiet now, cold and focused. I had to know the truth, and I was going to find out who was helping her pay for the empire she claimed was hers alone. Later that night, the house slept in its usual false peace, a shallow, breathy quiet that couldn't hide the rot underneath. Ara was upstairs in the guest room, pretending to rest, bless her heart. I couldn't. I couldn't sleep, couldn't rest, couldn't breathe the same air that had been so expertly poisoned by my mother's arrogance. The argument replayed in my head like a broken reel, her voice, her perfect, contemptuous smile, that final, awful silence. Every single word she had thrown at me told me there was something deeper than just wounded pride behind her cruelty. There was a desperate, financial motive. I knew exactly where I had to go. I took the old hallway down to the basement, my father's old workspace. This wasn't a finished, polished part of the Hale estate. It was the rough, honest core, the place where he actually built things. The light switch buzzed to life, revealing shelves crammed with blueprints and tools, all covered in a thick layer of dust. The air smelled of paper, oil, and something heavier, time, maybe, or the weight of unkept promises. The metal file cabinet stood against the far wall, a huge, cold sentinel, locked with a rusted padlock. My father was meticulously organized, a trait my mother always called pedantic. I remembered exactly where he used to keep the spare key taped behind his portrait in the study. I walked back up, retrieved the key, and returned to the quiet, musty gloom. The lock gave way with a tired, resigned click. It sounded less like an opening and more like a final, pathetic surrender. Inside were rows upon rows of folders, financial reports, project drafts, trust statements. My hands shook, but my resolve was cold steel. I was looking for proof, not reconciliation. My eyes caught a particular ledger, labeled 2012, 2016. I opened it and froze. The page was a sickening parade of transfers, one after another, draining the family trust fund. The recipient, Sienna Hale Holdings, and the transfers were authorized by M.H. Margaret Hale, my mother. But below that, another line made my stomach drop out. The transaction was marked Joint Liability R. Hale. My initials, Rowan Hale. I hadn't lived here in 5 years, hadn't signed a document for this company in half a decade, yet my name, my financial identity, was somehow still chained to this monstrous debt. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. There were copies of bank letters, 2 past due notices, warnings addressed directly to me. The cruel irony was suffocating. She called me a failure while simultaneously shackling me to her own failure to maintain the illusion of wealth. "Ara," I called softly, not wanting to disturb the house's fake peace. She appeared instantly at the top of the stairs, barefoot and sleepy, but instantly alert. She knew, instinctively, that something devastating had just been uncovered. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Look at this," I said, handing her the ledger, the paper feeling heavy and toxic. "These transfers, they're under my name." She frowned, flipping through the pages quickly, her eyes sharp and professional. Then she reached for a separate envelope marked Vallecito Lake House Maintenance. "Isn't that your family's summer property?" she asked. "It was sold," I ground out, anger tightening my jaw. "Years ago." "Then why?" Ara asked, her brow furrowed in disbelief. "Is the maintenance still being paid?" I stared at the receipt, the credit card number, the expiration date. It was mine, my account. My money funding a ghost property the family no longer owned, all while my mother publicly ridiculed my worth. "Rowan," Ara said, her voice tightening with the realization. "This isn't an accident. Someone's been using your credit, maybe even your signature." We went deeper into the cabinet, the stench of deceit growing stronger. We found another folder, smaller and thicker. Inside, a single page of authorization bearing my name, my handwriting, except it wasn't mine. The curve of the R was subtly wrong, the spacing unnatural. Whoever forged it knew me too well, knew my signature intimately enough to make a devastatingly convincing copy. A coffee ring stained the corner of the paper, faint but familiar. My mother's cup always left those rings a small, careless habit in a life built on meticulous control. She didn't just authorize it, she was personally involved in the forgery. At the bottom of the stack was a sticky note, a simple, faded square. It contained only 2 characters, meet, N. Cold realization, sharp and metallic, crept up my spine. "Who was N?" Ara asked, but I didn't answer. The puzzle was coming together, and the pieces were far uglier than I could have imagined. Someone was the inside accomplice, the person physically executing Margaret Hale's commands. My head buzzed, and I heard footsteps overhead, slow, deliberate. Maybe just the house settling, maybe not. I closed the ledger, slipped it back, and returned the key to its hiding place. But before shutting the drawer, I planted something small and invisible between the folders. A pen camera. Era touched my arm, her eyes wide. "What are you doing?" "If anyone touches this again," I said, my voice quiet but laced with venom, "I'll know who N is." As we turned off the light and the basement door creaked shut, I looked back. The shadows around my father's desk seemed alive, whispering in the dark. For the first time, I wondered if my family had ever stopped borrowing money, borrowing loyalty, borrowing from me. I had been too blind, too loyal, to notice that every single debt in that kingdom had my name scrawled all over it. My anger was no longer just hot rage. It was a promise. I was going to find out how deep this went, and I wasn't stopping. Until the whole foundation crumbled. The road to Vallecito curved through pines that looked like they'd been holding their breath for years. The farther I drove, the quieter the world became, until even the radio static seemed too loud. The city noise of Denver, the sickening politeness of the estate, the sound of my mother's mocking laughter, I needed to outrun it all. I needed the cold, quiet truth that the lake promised. The lake came into view at dusk, a sheet of glass reflecting a sky the color of smoke, and there it sat on its edge, hollow-eyed, shutters half hanging like broken lids. The lake house. It had once been our sanctuary, the place where my father fixed things and where my mother only pretended they weren't falling apart. It was supposed to have been sold years ago, a piece of the past neatly liquidated to cover some of the mounting Hale family debts. But the maintenance receipts in the basement, charged directly to my card, proved that the lie was still very much alive. My father's will was one thing. This was something else. A calculated, ongoing theft that used my life as its fuel. The anger was cold and constant, a low thrumming in my chest. I parked beside the dock and stepped out into air that smelled of rain and metal. The lock on the front door gave way far too easily. It was a pathetic gesture, almost like the house itself was resigning to its fate. Inside, the silence was so complete it had texture. My boots echoed over warped planks. Dust motes swirled in the faint light spilling from the lake windows. The place still carried my father's imprint, tools neatly arranged, a fishing rod leaning in the corner, sketches pinned to a board as if waiting for him to return. The quiet was infuriating. The antithesis of the toxic noise my mother created. It was proof of the honest life she'd suffocated. I checked the utilities first. Water, electricity. The meters were active, payments up to date. Someone had been here recently, keeping this shrine to deceit perfectly maintained, all on my dime. My card. I walked into the small attic above the kitchen. I remembered it well. This was where he kept his truly personal things, away from the prying eyes of Margaret Hale. I found the chest he'd carved years ago, his initials etched into the lid. The hinges protested loudly when I lifted it. Inside were drafts of building plans, a compass, and a thick, yellow envelope sealed with brittle wax. The seal had been cracked open and pressed shut again. Someone had been here before me. Of course they had. My mother never missed a chance to invade privacy when profit was involved. I hesitated, then unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was his, measured, precise. "Rowan," it began. My throat tightened. "If you're reading this, it means your mother has chosen to keep the family standing by using what I left behind. There's a secondary account, Valicito Auxiliary. She believes it will hold us together. It will do the opposite. Don't let my name become her collateral." The letter wasn't finished. The last line cut off mid-word, as if he'd been interrupted. Clipped to it were two documents, a bank statement listing transfers from the Hale Family Trust to Sienna Hale Holdings LLC, and a worn hard hat with the Hale Construction logo. The dates matched the week after his funeral. The timeline made no sense unless my mother had acted before the will was even settled. That wasn't fear. That was criminal opportunism. I sat on the cold boards, the anger escalating to raw disbelief. They'd moved his money into Sienna's corporate account, using a secondary auxiliary fund, just days after he died. And she had the gall to call me a failure. At the bottom of the chest was a small drawer. Inside lay a magnetic card, the kind issued to employees for restricted accounts. A note was taped to it, a single initial scrolled in pencil, N. The same letter from the ledger. Whoever N was, they'd helped my mother move the money. The whole place, once a sanctuary, now shimmered with the stillness of deceit. Beautiful from afar, dangerous up close. I pocketed the card and the letter. I needed proof, not another confrontation. Speaking too soon had always been my mistake. This time, I'd build a bridge of evidence strong enough that no one could burn it. Before leaving, I called Jules Aoyo, an old friend who now worked at a bank in Denver. "I need to trace a dormant account," I told him. "Valicito Auxiliary, linked to the Hale Trust." He didn't ask why, just said he'd run it quietly. Outside, the evening had thickened into mist. I walked down to the dock, the wood creaking under my weight. In the mud near the tire tracks, a half-burned cigarette still smelled fresh. My mother never smoked. Someone else was here, someone who didn't belong to the old life. I turned at the sound of gravel crunching behind me. Headlights cut through the fog. Sienna stepped out of her car, arms folded, hair pulled back tight. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Funny," I replied, my voice hard. "I could say the same to whoever's been paying for this place with my card." She didn't answer. The wind off the lake rippled her dress, and for a moment I thought she looked like a child again, lost between guilt and fear. Then she turned away. "Go home, Rowan," she said softly. "You don't know what you're starting." But I did, I murmured to the empty air. I just didn't know how deep it went. I knew exactly what I was starting. The end of her lies and the beginning of my reckoning. Monday morning. Denver woke up loud and metallic, the city humming with a rhythm that didn't care about family wars. The Hale construction tower glinted in the sun like a monument to my mother's cold, crushing willpower. The anger was a knot in my stomach, tight and constant, fueled by the knowledge that I was paying for this whole, glittering lie. I walked in through the revolving doors using my old employee badge. The security guard glanced up, recognized the last name, and waved me through the Hale name, the one she'd dragged through the mud and shackled to her debts. The building smelled of polished concrete and ambition, an ambition that wasn't honest, wasn't built on my father's ethics, but on manipulation and theft. On the 12th floor, the accounting department was a maze of glass walls and cold light. I kept my voice casual, a professional mask over the simmering rage. I asked for a maintenance record on the Vallecito property, pretending it was routine. That's when I met him, Nathan Corwin. Neat hair, nervous smile, and a company hard hat sitting on his desk. He was my mother's pawn, the man who had been the hands and feet of the forgery. And he looked smaller, weaker, than I had imagined. I leaned in, my voice low but sharp. "I just need to verify the payments on a secondary account," I said. He nodded too quickly. "The auxiliary account," he stammered. "Mrs. Hale handles those directly." Then, the color drained from his face as he realized what he'd just admitted. "I mean, she approves them, of course." I studied him, letting the silence hang heavy. "You handled the transfers, though," I pushed. He swallowed hard. "I only follow directives. Everything is documented, including forged authorizations." His mouth opened, closed. He muttered, "It was internal. Your mother's orders. She said you'd given permission years ago." The lie was flimsy, transparent, but the admission was everything. I kept my voice steady, betraying none of the furious satisfaction I felt. "Did you ever see me sign anything?" I asked. He didn't answer. He couldn't. My phone was already recording in my pocket. Nathan's voice, his desperate confession, was being captured, transforming his fear into my evidence. As I left his desk, the company hard hat, his uniform of complicity, rolled off the corner and landed upside down near my shoe. Inside, a small sticker read, "Authorized by MH." I placed it back gently, almost respectfully. Lies needed their uniforms too. I didn't stop. I took the elevator straight to the 18th floor. The doors to my mother's office were open, a perfect, calculated display of power. She sat behind her glass desk, Denver's skyline stretching behind her like a crown, a view she hadn't built, but manipulated her way into. "Rowan," she said, smiling thinly. "What a surprise." "I came to check on the auxiliary account," I said, my voice flat. "You're digging again," she dismissed. "I'm looking," I corrected. "There's a difference." Her voice sharpened, suddenly brittle. "You left this company. You left this family. Stop pretending you still have a say." I stepped closer, invading her carefully curated space. "Then stop using my name to keep it running." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand what it takes to hold everything together." "No," I said quietly, the rage finally surfacing. "I understand. Perfectly. I just won't pay for it anymore." For a heartbeat, silence filled the office, the air thick with unspoken debt. Then she leaned back, eyes glittering with cruel triumph. "You think you're uncovering corruption?" "Fine." She smiled, a truly evil curve of her lips. "But remember this. Sienna's the one leading our biggest project now, Orem Towers. She filed the design 5 years ago. The air left my lungs. The ground beneath me tilted. That was a gut punch she hadn't needed to throw, but she threw it anyway, just to maximize the pain. "That's my project," I whispered, the rage turning to despair. "It was never yours," she replied, a clean, swift cut. "You abandoned it when you walked away." She finished it. The words hit harder than any insult she'd thrown before. They'd taken my father's money, my credit, and now my life's work. My proof that I'd ever built anything of my own was now credited to my little sister. They'd taken my legacy. I turned for the door, the humiliation and anger making me physically sick, but her voice followed me, a parting shot. "Rowan, family sacrifices for each other. You should remember that." In the elevator down, I checked the recording. Nathan's voice was clear enough to be damning. I slid the USB drive into my pocket, believing the battle was nearly won. Outside, the sunlight bounced off the mirrored glass, blinding me for a second. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Be careful who's copying your files." I stopped cold. The USB wasn't in my pocket anymore. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. The car door clicked open on its own as I approached. The passenger seat was empty, but the glove box hung ajar. The USB was gone. Somewhere above me, in that tower of steel and secrets, someone, perhaps my mother, perhaps Nathan, bought back. Perhaps Sienna had already erased my proof. I looked up at the Hale logo gleaming against the sky, a perfect silver H, polished and hollow. I thought of my father's final, desperate words, Don't let my name become collateral. It already had, and this time, I wasn't sure I could afford the cost of taking it back. My anger was no longer just pain. It was the cold, focused fury of a man who had lost everything twice. The Four Seasons ballroom smelled like champagne and pretense. It was nauseating. The polished marble floors reflected the soft amber glow of the chandeliers, highlighting the massive screen behind the stage which flashed 25 years of Hale Construction's legacy. My father's legacy, rewritten in golden letters that no longer bore his name. Every guest wore their ambition like perfume. The anger I carried was now a quiet, dangerous certainty. My mother stood at the center of it all, a dark star, her pearls glinting under the spotlights, her voice smooth and commanding as she greeted investors and reporters. Ara and I walked in just as the host announced, "Tonight we honor a quarter-century of Hale Construction under the D. Remarkable vision of Mrs. Margaret Hale and her daughter Sienna." Applause swelled. I caught my reflection in one of the mirrors along the wall, an outsider in my own history. We took our seats near the back. My mother's speech began with the usual pleasantries, the same rehearsed humility that always masked her suffocating control. Then the video started, an edited timeline of projects, faces, and awards. But when the screen flashed the blueprint of Orem Towers, I felt my stomach twist violently. My initials had been replaced by Sienna Hale, lead architect. My design, my lines, my angles, now wearing someone else's name. That was the cut she'd made in her office. This was her proudly showing the wound. Ara's hand found mine under the table, a grounding anchor. "This is it," she whispered. "Are you sure you're ready?" I wasn't, I confessed, my voice barely audible. But I had to be. There was no going back. They'd taken the money, the credit, and now the last piece of my professional dignity. When my name was called, the son of the late founder, I walked to the stage. The applause was polite, a formality. My mother stood just behind the podium, her smile tightening when I reached for the microphone. She knew. Somewhere deep in her cold, calculating core, she knew this was the moment I was finally fighting back. "Thank you," I began, letting the microphone capture the steady, hard edge in my voice. "It's an honor to stand here celebrating the company my father built from nothing. He believed in foundations, strong ones, built on truth." My pulse pounded in my ears, but my voice was steady. Behind me, the main screen flickered. I turned and gave a subtle, quiet nod toward the technician by the soundboard. He was Jules, the friend who had helped me. The second projector came to life, illuminating a hidden corner of the room. A different presentation began, flashing an undeniable truth across the marble and glass. First, the bank statements from the Vallecito auxiliary account. Then, the ledger entries proving the money flowed to Sienna Hale Holdings. Next, the scanned authorization forms bearing my forged signature. The room filled with murmurs, glasses clinked nervously. And finally, the audio file. Nathan's desperate voice, recorded in that sterile 12th floor office, confessing that he followed her orders. The room went silent. "This," I continued, my voice gaining volume and venom, "is the foundation Hale Construction stands on today. A company that survives not on innovation, but on manipulation." Sienna stood up, her face pale, the perfect composure gone. "Mom, is that true?" she asked, her voice tight with panic. My mother's smile faltered, but her voice rose, brittle and desperate. "Everything I've done was for this family, for our reputation." "No," I said softly, cutting through her theatrical defense. "For control." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered my name. Someone else raised their phone, recording. The whole spectacular, ugly family collapse. And then the main screen glitched again. An unplanned file appeared. The title read, "Orem Towers Contract 722 Pre-Approval." The signature line, "Margaret Hale," dated 1 month before my father's death. Gasps rippled across the room. This wasn't just using my name. This was a premeditated theft of the entire company while my father was still alive. My mother turned toward the control booth, fury in her eyes. The lights dimmed for a split second. When they returned, the contract filled the screen in full view. A whisper came from behind me. "I found it on their server. You finished this, Rowan." I looked out over the stunned audience, my own rage now tinged with a devastating sadness. "You built a kingdom out of fear, Mother," I told her, my voice clear over the screeching microphone feedback. "But fear isn't concrete. It cracks." She reached for me, her composure finally gone. but Sienna stepped between us. "Stop it, both of you!" My sister cried, her voice breaking. She looked at the contract, at the room, at the guests filming every second. Dad deserved better than this. The spotlight shifted, flooding my mother's face in stark white. The control she'd held for decades evaporated under that glare. The golden cup in Sienna's hand slipped, hit the marble floor, and shattered. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. Then cameras flashed. Guests began to whisper, gathering their things, hurrying for the exits. I dropped the microphone. My father believed in honest work. But tonight, honesty finally worked for itself. The air outside the ballroom was cold and sharp. Ara gripped my arm as we stepped into the night, but even her touch felt fragile amidst the chaos. Reporters, their faces hungry and their camera flashes blinding, were already shouting questions, turning our family tragedy into a grotesque spectacle. I had won the battle for the narrative, but the war for my life and Ara's was just beginning. My mother pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of furious, unmasked hatred. Her voice, raw and desperate, cut through the chaos one last time. "You've destroyed everything." I turned to her, my own voice low and steady, laced with cold conviction. "No," I said. "I just scraped off the paint you used to hide the rot behind us." The golden hail banner swayed in the wind, a symbol of the hollow empire. I knew that by morning, the headline would read, "Hail Construction under federal investigation." I knew she would no longer fight me with words. The next battle would be fought in court, with lawyers and endless procedural mudslinging. The morning after the gala, Denver felt different. The streets outside my apartment were quieter, as if the city itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Ara sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through news alerts, her coffee untouched. The headlines were relentless. "Hale family scandal shakes construction empire." My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from reporters, lawyers, and numbers I didn't recognize. Then came the call I was expecting. "Mr. Hale," the voice said, firm and official. "This is Agent Turner, FBI Denver. We need you to come in for questioning." At the federal building, the air smelled of paper and disinfectant. I sat across from two agents who asked the same questions in different ways. Where did I get the documents? How did I obtain the recordings? Did I alter anything? I answered honestly, the only path left to me. Every piece of evidence came from my father's files, from my own accounts, from the truth my mother buried. When I left the room, my phone buzzed again. An alert from Jules, my bank friend. "Nathan's gone. His accounts are empty. Someone paid him to disappear." I leaned against the wall, the weight of it pressing on me. She'd gotten to Nathan Corwin. She'd bought him back. Without his testimony, the case became murkier, relying solely on the documents and the pen camera footage. My mother was relentless. Back home, I opened my laptop. An email waited in my inbox, with no sender address. The message was a direct threat. "If you don't stop, Ara's past becomes public." Attached was a photo. Her old employee ID from Hale Construction, dated 2018. "Ara!" I called out, the word thick with dread. She froze when she saw the screen. "I worked there for a few months," she admitted, her voice tight. "Before I met you, your mother hired me as a freelancer. I left when I realized how she treated people." The guilt on her face was agonizing, the fear that this would change things between us. "I swear I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said quietly, but the timing was too perfect. My mother was turning her focus toward Ara, now weaponizing her guilt, trying to make me suffer by attacking the one good thing in my life. By afternoon, the damage had started. A local business site ran a piece claiming Ara had stolen corporate data. Within hours, my inbox filled with cancellations. Clients withdrew projects. My own firm's contracts were suspended. The truth I fought for had become toxic by association. That evening, a courier knocked at our door. Inside the package was my father's silver pen, the one from the Ridgeway display case. There was a note in delicate handwriting. "Rowan, don't let them rewrite the signature again." It was signed simply, S. Sienna. She hadn't chosen a side at the gala, but now I knew. She was sending me a tool for the fight. An artifact of my father's real signature and integrity. An act that felt like a tiny fissure in the mountain of my family's deceit. I drove back to Ridgeway after dark. The estate loomed like a skeleton against the sky, windows boarded, the lawn wild. Police tape fluttered near the gate. Property under federal investigation. Yet the basement door was ajar. I stepped inside. The smell of smoke hit me first, thick and acrid. My mother stood near the furnace, feeding papers into the crysa. Flames. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes hollow, but still fiercely determined. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," I replied, the contempt heavy in my voice. "It's evidence." She turned, clutching a manila envelope close. "You think you've won? You haven't. I built everything your father dreamed of, and you're tearing it down." "Dad built something honest," I countered, the anger finally breaking through. "You built a monument to fear." She threw the envelope into the fire. I lunged forward, grabbing it before it burned completely. Inside were account statements, offshore accounts bearing her name and Nathan's. Proof enough. "Confronting me won't save you," she hissed. "They'll drag your name through the same mud." "They already did," I said, clutching the documents. "Now I'm cleaning it with truth." For a moment she looked small, almost fragile. "I did all of this for love," she whispered. "No, I," said softly, delivering my final, cold verdict. "You did it for control." I walked out, the envelope clutched to my chest. The car sputtered before starting. A faint beep echoed from beneath the dashboard. I crouched down and found it, a tracking device wedged under the seat. She wasn't just burning evidence, she was following me. I threw it into the lake on the drive back, watching it sink into the black water. Back at my apartment, I set the rescued documents on the table. Ara wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. I pressed record on my phone and spoke into the silence, recording my last piece of narration before the court fight. "They don't just fear losing money," I said. "They fear losing the right to rewrite history." The next morning, I handed everything over to my lawyer. The case was going federal. Sienna texted shortly after, a sinking, damning realization. "Mom won't be at court alone tomorrow." I stared at the message, the words sinking like stones. If she meant Nathan, it meant one thing. He'd been bought again, and the game wasn't over. My mother was not just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for the right to continue her lie, no matter the cost. The courthouse in Denver looked like it had been carved from winter itself. The morning air was sharp, the sky a pale gray, and snow was falling slow and soundless. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the final, ugly truth to emerge. Inside, the courtroom glowed with amber lights against dark oak panels. The air carried the weight of too many truths waiting to be said. I sat beside my lawyer, the silver pen my father had once used cold between my fingers. Its weight, the weight of his real signature. His integrity was grounding me more than anything else could. Across the aisle, my mother sat straight-backed, composed, dressed in her signature navy coat. Her expression was calm enough to unnerve anyone who didn't know her. I knew better. That calm was armor, a final, impenetrable defense. The judge's gavel came down. The clerk called the case. State of Colorado versus Margaret Hale. The title itself sounded surreal. Family turned into a headline. Love turned into evidence. I watched her, wondering if she still believed this was all about legacy. The prosecution began, their voice steady and deliberate. They laid out the trail piece by piece. The forged ledgers, the Vallecito auxiliary account, the transfers that drained the Hale family trust into private holdings. Each exhibit landed like a hammer against the years of silence I had carried. Then came the moment. They played Nathan's recorded confession, the one I'd risked everything to retrieve. The room went so still I could hear the snow melting on the windowsills. My mother didn't flinch. "That man acted on his own," she said firmly, her voice clear and without a tremor. "He forged documents to steal from us. I had no part in it." The brazen lie, delivered under oath, was sickening. The prosecutor nodded and turned to the door. "Then let's hear it from him." Nathan Corwin stepped into the courtroom like a man walking toward his own shadow. He looked smaller than I remembered, hollow-eyed. His hands shook as he took the oath. My mother had bought him back, but fear still had its grip on him. When asked whether he had acted alone, he hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. It was a tiny, crucial hesitation. "I was following orders," he finally said, his voice breaking. "Mrs. Hale told me to move the funds. She said it was temporary, just to keep the company stable. I was paid $250,000 for my discretion." My mother's face cracked for the first time. "You're lying," she hissed. But Nathan couldn't look at her. Sienna was next. I hadn't known whether she'd appear at all. She walked in wearing a gray coat that looked 2 sizes too big, her eyes rimmed red. When she took the stand, she kept looking anywhere but at me. "Miss Hale," the prosecutor said, "do you know about the account transfers after your father's death?" "I know," she said at first, her voice small. I only knew what Mom told me. She said everything was legal." Then the screen lit up again. The footage from the pen camera, the grainy, damning footage of the night my mother burned the files in Ridgway's basement. The glow of the flames filled the courtroom, and Sienna's breath caught. She pressed her hand to her mouth, then whispered, "Mom, please stop." She shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "I can't lie anymore," she said. "Mom transferred Dad's money into my account, said it was for taxes. She used Rowan's name to keep the trust from being audited." Then she looked directly at me. "And Orem Towers," she confessed, the final painful admission of professional betrayal. "That was Dad's design, not mine." My mother stood suddenly, her voice rising, brittle. "Everything I did was for my children, for this family." The outburst cracked. The silence, echoing off the wooden walls. Then her knees gave way, and she sank back into her chair, trembling. I stood slowly, handed the silver pen to my lawyer. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low but clear. "This was my father's. It holds his real signature, his handwriting, his integrity. Compare it to the authorization forms used to steal his trust." The handwriting analyst examined both. The silence stretched for what felt like forever until he finally spoke. "The signatures on the authorization documents are forged. The original belongs to Mr. Robert Hale." A collective exhale rippled through the room. My mother's eyes closed. The judge's gavel struck again, final and cold. The court ordered restitution of assets obtained through fraudulent means. The Hale family trust would be divided according to the original will. 50% to Rowan Hale, 50% to Sienna Hale. I barely heard the rest. My heart felt both heavy and hollow. My mother didn't look at me as they led her away. Sienna sat motionless, tears glistening. I touched her shoulder, and she flinched before whispering, "I'm sorry, Rowan." Outside, Ara waited, her coat dusted with snow. She took my hand as if pulling me back into life. "It's over," she said softly. "Not yet," I murmured, staring at the courthouse doors. "There's still something left at Ridgway." The snow drifted down heavier now, but for the first time in years, I could breathe without the taste of guilt. By the time I reached Ridgway that night, the snow had deepened, covering the ugly scars of the estate. The windows were boarded, the gates locked, the grounds covered in thin white frost. The house was a shadow of what it once was, a monument to the failure of ambition, standing cold and silent. Yet, from the road, I could see it. The porch light was still on, glowing faintly through the haze of snow. It was a small, stubborn glow that shouldn't have been there. The electricity was supposed to be cut. A technicality, perhaps, but one that instantly put me on edge. My mother was still fighting, still manipulating, even in defeat. I parked by the stone path and walked toward the front steps. The snow muffled everything, the crunch beneath my boots, the wind against the trees. The air smelled faintly of smoke and paper ash, the remnants of what she'd tried to erase. Inside, the house was stripped of its grandeur. Dust covered the marble floors. The portraits were gone from the walls. It was just a cold, hollow shell, exactly like the legacy she'd left behind. I walked toward the kitchen, toward the memory of the few genuine moments we'd shared, and I saw a small envelope wedged beneath a table leg. It was brittle and yellowed with age, and my name was written on it in my father's familiar, steady handwriting. My heart clenched with a painful mix of loss and furious love. I opened it carefully. His words were few, uneven, as though written in haste, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of observation. "Margaret isn't cruel. She's afraid of losing what we built, afraid our children will live like we did, scraping by. But fear without love becomes a cage. If she locks you inside, promise me you'll find the key." I sat at the table for a long time, reading those lines until the ink blurred. My mother's cruelty was an armor of fear, a fear so profound she was willing to destroy everyone around her, including the memory of my father, just to maintain the illusion of safety. The house creaked around me, the sound of a memory exhaling. My anger wasn't gone, but it was shifting, evolving from bitter rage into a cold, hard understanding. When I finally stepped back outside, the snow had deepened. On the porch steps sat a figure in a dark coat, my mother. Her hair was grayer now, thinner, her hands trembling slightly as she held them near the porch light for warmth. The armor was gone, replaced by a devastating fragility. "I left it on so you'd find your way back," she said, her voice soft, almost human again. I didn't answer. I just stood there, letting the silence accuse her. After a long moment, she asked, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head, the snow hitting my face. "No, but I'll never be like you." Her eyes glistened. She reached into her coat and pulled out another envelope. "Your father left this for you." I couldn't bring myself to give it until now. Inside was a small brass key and a note that read, "For the day you finally say no." The key, the way out of the cage. I went down to the basement one last time. The air was damp, the walls bare. In the far corner, behind an old tool chest, was a small locked box. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside lay the original blueprints for Orem Towers, dated and signed by my father, along with a single line in his handwriting, "Rowan, rebuild this time for yourself." They hadn't just stolen the design. My mother had withheld my final gift from my father, the blueprint for my own future. My heart, so heavy for so long, felt a fragile stir of hope. My father hadn't left me a debt. He had left me the foundation for my redemption. When I came back upstairs, the porch was empty. My mother had gone, leaving only her footprints in the snow leading toward the gate. The light still burned above the door, steady against the wind. As I stood there, headlights approached, the hum of a familiar car. Sienna stepped out, Ara beside her. Sienna smiled faintly, eyes red but calm. "I sold the house," she said, her voice quiet. "Half goes to the scholarship fund for architecture students. Dad would have wanted that." Ara slipped her arm through mine. "It's over now, Rowan. Let's go home." I looked back at the house. The porch light flickered, then steadied again, warm and fragile in the falling snow. My mother once told me that light meant safety. But standing there, I realized it meant something else. That forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just keeps the dark from winning. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The light was still there, a small, stubborn glow fading into the distance. That wasn't the light of a home anymore. It was the last light of understanding her silent confession, her final, clumsy attempt to make peace. The snow blurred the road ahead, and I whispered to myself. The anger finally settled into resolve. "You built your life from fear, Mom. I'll build mine from faith. And when I rebuild, there will be no basement left to hide the truth." My father, Robert Hale, built that construction company from nothing but honest sweat and clean blueprints. He believed in foundations, not just of steel and concrete, but of truth. My mother, Margaret, believed in polish. She believed the only thing that mattered was the facade, the presentation, the relentless illusion of success that had to be maintained at any cost. That was the core rot, the silent disagreement that killed him long before his heart actually gave out. When I was younger, I thought her obsession with keeping up appearances was just vanity. I remember the terror in her eyes when his first major project nearly went under. The table went quiet that night at dinner, not in fear of losing money, but in fear of losing the status that money provided. She never forgave him for that near drowning, and she never forgave me for inheriting his quiet integrity instead of her ruthless ambition. Her gaze often slid to me, reminding me that my father's debts nearly drowned us. I spent years trying to prove I was worthy of the name she wore so proudly, only to find out she saw my very existence as a threat to her control. I was gone for 5 years, long enough for the paint to crack behind the family portraits, but not long enough for her to forget that I was the rightful heir to the company's ethics and potentially its control. The humiliation she delivered at Sienna's birthday dinner was a performance meant to permanently excise me from the family narrative. I realized in the cold light of the Denver morning, after finding the ledger, that the debt she claimed nearly destroyed them wasn't just old news. It was the mechanism of her current control. She leveraged his mistakes to keep the reins tight. The Vallecito auxiliary account, that was my father's desperate, last-ditch effort to create a safe haven. The letter I found at the lake house, written in his precise hand, laid it bare. He knew she would try to use what he left behind to keep the family standing. He explicitly warned me. "She believes it will hold us together. It will do the opposite. Don't let my name become her collateral." That pain, the realization that he died trying to warn me about the woman he married, was a deeper cut than any insult she could deliver. The letter was clipped to a worn hard hat with the Hale Construction logo, a symbol of the real company she was destroying. But she didn't just use his name, she used mine. The joint, liability R. Hale on the ledger entries wasn't a mistake, it was a calculated risk. By shackling my credit and my dormant accounts to the family trust, she ensured that if her house of cards ever fell, I would be dragged down with it. My name was on every document, making my 5 years of freedom a financial fiction. The maintenance bills for the Vallecito Lake House, paid with my card, were proof of a perpetual, silent siphon, a low-grade theft that allowed her to maintain control over a property she had supposedly liquidated years ago. The fury that boiled up from this discovery was ice-cold, targeted, and total. She didn't just steal money, she stole time. She stole the peace I thought I had earned, all to fuel her obsession. She tried to erase me, and yet, she relied on my financial existence to keep her empire from collapsing. That level of hypocrisy was what fueled my pursuit of the evidence, what gave me the nerve to plant that pen camera. The small, stained, sticky note that simply read, "Meet N" wasn't just a clue. It was the thread that led to the accomplice, Nathan Corwin, her chosen weapon for the practical, messy part of the forgery. He was the weak point, the man she'd pay to do her dirty work, the one who would, for a price, betray everyone, including himself. I looked at the blueprints and the forged authorizations again. The curve of the R was wrong, the coffee stain familiar. She was careless because she was powerful. She believed her wealth made her untouchable. But my father's integrity, embodied in a few scattered papers and a small silver pen, was the only thing that could stand up to the monstrous lie she had built. My revenge was no longer about payback. It was about honoring the honest foundation he believed in. It was about taking back my name from the role of collateral and making it a symbol of truth. The immediate consequence of the gala wasn't legal, it was personal. My mother, Margaret Hale, understood that I could withstand her financial ruin, but I couldn't withstand the destruction of the one good thing in my life, Era. The rage I felt watching her tactical cruelty shift from money to reputation was a whole new level of cold, protective fury. I was already reeling from the betrayal of my own work, the realization that Orem Towers was stolen. They'd taken my father's money, my credit, and now my professional identity, the very proof that I had ever built anything of my own. But the text message that day, the one that warned me, "If you don't stop, Era's past becomes public," hit me harder than any of the forged ledgers. It meant my mother, sitting in her tower of steel, was actively hunting for a way to hurt me outside of court. The attached photo, Ara's old employee ID from Hale Construction, dated 2018, was the poison. When I showed Ara, the fear that flooded her eyes was agonizing. She froze. "I worked there for a few months," she admitted, her voice small and tight. "Before I met you, your mother hired me as a freelancer. I left when I realized how she treated people. She swore she didn't know about the deeper family rot when she met me. I knew she was telling the truth, but the timing was too perfect. My mother didn't need to believe Ara was guilty. She just needed to make it look that way. She was weaponizing Ara's guilt, turning my shield into a target. The damage started by afternoon. A local business site ran a piece claiming Ara had stolen corporate data. The headline was a lie, but the fallout was immediate and catastrophic. My inbox filled with cancellations. Clients withdrew projects. My own firm's contracts were suspended. The truth I fought for had become toxic by association. My mother was leveraging her reputation, even a damaged one, to crush mine. She didn't just want the money back. She wanted me professionally annihilated, stripped of my financial viability, just so I would be forced to return, tail tucked, to her control. The pain of watching Ara suffer was a deeper, hotter burn than any self-pity I felt. She was quiet, dignified, trying to hold it together. But I saw the relentless scrolling through the news alerts, the untouched coffee. I had pulled her into a war she never signed up for, against a monster who would use any weapon available. This was Margaret's ultimate weapon, attacking the people I loved. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. I wasn't just fighting for my half of the trust anymore. I was fighting to protect Ara, to prove that my foundation was strong enough to withstand the financial mudslinging. When Sienna sent that silver pen, that small, silent gesture of support, it confirmed that the battle lines were drawn inside the family itself. Sienna, finally breaking free of the same fear that had caged me, was giving me the tool for the final showdown. The real, honest signature of my father. I had to get the physical proof, the one thing she couldn't erase with a single text or a hacked file. That's what drove me back to Ridgeway. The sight of the police tape fluttering near the gate should have deterred me, but the smell of smoke pulled me right into the basement's dark embrace. Seeing my mother there, feeding papers into the furnace, her hair unkempt and her eyes hollow but fierce, was the ugliest truth of all. She was no longer the composed, elegant matriarch. She was a desperate criminal trying to erase her tracks. "You think you've won? You haven't," she spat. She actually believed she was the victim, tearing down the honest foundation my father built. When she threw the manila envelope into the fire, I lunged, feeling the heat, the sheer physical struggle to save the documents from becoming ash. Inside, the account statements for offshore accounts bearing her name and Nathan's. That was the final, unburnable truth. "Confronting me won't save you," she hissed, her last pathetic attempt to scare me into submission. "They'll drag your name through the same mud." "They already did," I told her, my voice cold and final. "Now I'm cleaning it with truth." Her pathetic whisper, "I did all of this for love," was the last lie she would tell me. "No," I said, "you did it for control." Then the final chilling revelation. The tracking device wedged beneath the car seat. Even in defeat, she was watching me, following me, obsessed with maintaining her desperate grasp. I threw the tracker into the black lake water, a final, symbolic severance. The reflection of Ridgeway burned behind me, orange against the surface. The house, her empire, her lies, they all looked the same in flames. The courthouse in Denver was a fortress of pale stone. But inside, the veneer of order was cracking under the sheer weight of our family's corruption. My lawyer and I sat at the defense table, the silver pen my father's final, honest testament, cold and heavy between my fingers. Across the aisle, my mother, Margaret Hale, remained a figure of chilling composure in her navy coat, an armor of control that I knew, finally, was only thin plating over utter panic. The prosecution began, laying out the trail piece by piece, the forged ledgers, the auxiliary account, the transfers that bled the Hale family trust dry into private holdings. Each exhibit was a hammer blow against the years of silent abuse and financial bondage I had endured. Then came the audio. They played Nathan Corwin's recorded confession, the one I'd risked everything to retrieve from the furnace's edge. The room went silent, so still you could hear the snow melting on the windowsills outside. My mother didn't flinch. She was ready. "That man acted on his own," she declared firmly, her voice echoing with the absolute conviction of a practiced liar. "He forged documents to steal from us. I had no part in it." The prosecutor turned to the door. "Then let's hear it from him." Nathan Corwin stepped into the courtroom like a man walking toward his own shadow. He was smaller, hollow-eyed, a true portrait of my mother's collateral damage. As he took the oath, his hands shook violently. I knew she had bought him back, cleaned out his accounts, and filled them again. The question was, had she bought his soul permanently? When asked if he acted alone, he hesitated a fraction of a second, but it was the silence of a man facing two hells. "I was following orders," he finally admitted, his voice cracking with the strain of his own cowardice. "Mrs. Hale told me to move the funds. She said it was temporary, just to keep the company stable. I was paid $250,000 for my discretion." My mother's face cracked a seismic shift in her composure. "You're lying," she hissed, but Nathan couldn't look at her. The truth, once spoken, was too heavy to deny. Sienna was next. I hadn't known if she would appear at all, knowing the pressure Margaret would apply. She walked in wearing a gray coat that seemed 2 sizes too big, the weight of the family's secret crushing her. When she took the stand, she looked anywhere but at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Miss Hale," the prosecutor pressed, "do you know about the account transfers after your father's death?" "I know," she whispered, her voice tiny. "I mean, I only knew what Mom told me. She said everything was legal." Then, the screen lit up with the footage from the pen camera, the grainy glow of the flames in Ridgeway's basement as my mother tried to burn the evidence. Sienna's breath hitched. She pressed her hand to her mouth and whispered, "Mom, please stop." The dam finally broke. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't lie anymore," she choked out. "Mom transferred Dad's money into my account, said it was for taxes. She used Rowan's name to keep the trust from being audited." The final, bitter, professional betrayal was next. She looked directly at me, and that raw honesty was more painful than any insult. "And Orem Towers," she confessed. "That was Dad's design, not mine." My mother stood suddenly, her composure shattering into 1,000 brittle pieces. "Everything I did was for my children, For this family. The outburst echoed, futile and pathetic. Then, her knees gave way, and she sank back into her chair, trembling, the cold truth of her collapse laid bare. I stood slowly, handed the silver pen to my lawyer, and delivered the last, crucial piece of evidence. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low but cuttingly clear. "This was my father's. It holds his real signature, his handwriting, his integrity. Compare it to the authorization forms used to steal his trust." The handwriting analyst examined them under the magnifier. The silence stretched, an unbearable weight of anticipation. When he finally spoke, his voice was clinical, final. "The signatures on the authorization documents are forged. The original belongs to Mr. Robert Hale." My mother's eyes closed, the last light of hope extinguished. The judge's gavel struck again, final and cold. The court ordered restitution of assets obtained through fraudulent means. The Hale family trust would be divided according to the original will. 50% to Rowan Hale, 50% to Sienna Hale. It was over. The family's legacy was reduced to a financial ledger, and the woman who had sought absolute control was finally, irrevocably, defeated. The judge's gavel struck again, its finality cold and absolute. The court ordered restitution of assets obtained through fraudulent means. The Hale family trust would be divided according to the original will. 50% to Rowan Hale, 50% to Sienna Hale. The numbers were correct, the justice delivered, but the victory felt heavy and hollow. I barely heard the rest of the pronouncement. When the judge adjourned, the sound of chairs scraping filled the courtroom. My mother didn't look at me as they led her away. Her final gesture of control was to deny me even the satisfaction of a direct confrontation. She was being led out, defeated, yet she still chose to look at the dark oak panels rather than the son who had finally forced the truth. Sienna sat motionless, tears glistening. The storm had passed over her, leaving her shaken but intact. I walked over to her. I didn't feel triumph, only a deep, weary sadness for the little girl who had been caught in the crossfire of her mother's ambition. I touched her shoulder. She flinched before whispering, "I'm sorry, Rowan." "I know," was all I could manage. It wasn't about her apology. It was about the years of silent complicity, the fear that had paralyzed her, just as it had once paralyzed me. But she had broken free on the stand, and that counted for everything. She had sacrificed her remaining illusion of a perfect family to honor our father. Outside, Ara waited, her coat dusted with snow. She took my hand as if pulling me back into the life that existed outside the gilded cage of the Hale family. "It's over," she said softly. "Not yet," I murmured, staring at the courthouse doors. There was still something, left at Ridgeway, the final, painful remnants of my father's legacy, waiting for me to collect them. The snow drifted down heavier now, but for the first time in years, I could breathe without the taste of guilt. The car ride back was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, a shared silence between two people who had survived a war. We knew the victory was only partial. The headlines were already being written, "Hale Construction under federal investigation." The mud Margaret had promised me was already flying, trying to taint Ara's firm and my own reputation. The truth had become toxic by association. We spent the evening setting the rescued documents on the table. Offshore accounts, Nathan's name alongside hers. Proof enough to keep the case moving forward, even with Nathan now gone. I looked at the documents, at the mountain of debt and deception, and I pressed record on my phone, recording one last thought before resting. They don't just fear losing money. I spoke into the Poe. Silence. They fear losing the right to rewrite history. My mother was the ultimate editor, trying to scrub away the failures and leave only the perfect, profitable narrative. My father's philosophy, the one my mother always scorned, was that true wealth was built on integrity, not on polish. He often told me, "Fear without love becomes a cage." He knew Margaret was locking herself inside that cage, and that she was desperate to drag us in with her. The division of the trust, the 50-over-50 split, felt less like a financial gain and more like the severing of a tumor. My portion wasn't wealth. It was the capital to rebuild my life and Ara's, a foundation finally untainted by her debt and deceit. The true value was the ability to finally put my name on my own work, to claim Orem Towers as mine. I realized that what hurt most was the years of emotional blackmail, the subtle erosion of my self-worth. Every time she called me a failure, she was simply projecting her own crippling fear of being revealed as a fraud. That understanding, that cold, clinical diagnosis of her character, was the most profound form of healing. The anger was settling into a grim resolve, a commitment to build a life so honest, so structurally sound, that her past could never breach its walls. The next phase wasn't revenge. It was an act of creation, building something pure from the wreckage. The decision to return to the boarded-up Ridgeway estate one last time was an act of finality, not nostalgia. The estate was a cold skeleton now, a monument to greed covered in thin white frost. My mother's house, her empire, was finished, its fate sealed by the court. Yet, as I approached, I saw that pathetic, small porch light still glowing faintly through the snow haze. It was supposed to be cut off. It was her last, small act of desperation, a beacon of false safety she couldn't bear to extinguish. I parked and walked toward the front steps. The air smelled faintly of smoke and paper ash, the sickening reminders of what she had tried to erase. The house was cold and gutted, stripped of its grandeur. Dust covered the marble floors, the portraits gone. She took the pictures, but she couldn't take the memory of the truth. In the kitchen, under the table leg, I found it. The yellowed envelope with my name and my father's handwriting. His final, fragile attempt to reach me across the chasm of her deceit. I opened it, and the words, written in haste, were heavy with painful clarity. Margaret isn't cruel. She's afraid. Afraid of losing what we built. Afraid our children will live like we did, scraping by. But fear without love becomes a cage. If she locks you inside, promise me you'll find the key. The rage was finally tempered by profound, weary understanding. My father saw her not as a villain, but as a victim of her own terror. It didn't excuse the forgery or the emotional wreckage, but it explained the source of the poison. I sat there, the house creaking around me, exhaling a memory. When I finally stepped back outside, the snow was deep. On the porch steps sat the figure in the dark coat. My mother. Her hair was thinner, gray now, her hands trembling. The armor was completely gone. "I left it on so you'd find your way back," she said, her voice soft, almost human. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "No," I said, cold but truthful. "But I'll never be like you." That was the final, total severance. I wouldn't carry her fear. Her eyes glistened. She reached into her coat and pulled out the envelope. "Your father left this for you." I couldn't bring myself to give it until now. Inside was the small brass key and the note. "For the day you finally say no." I went down to the basement one last time. Damp air, bare walls. In the far corner was a small locked box. The key fit perfectly. Inside lay the original blueprints for Orem Towers, dated and signed by my father, and the single crucial line, "Rowan, rebuild this time for yourself." This was his true legacy. Not the money, but the work. When I came back upstairs, the porch was empty. My mother had gone, leaving only her footprints in the snow leading toward the gate. The light still burned above the door, steady against the wind. Just then, headlights approached Sienna and Ara. Sienna's eyes were red but calm. "I sold the house," Sienna said. "Half goes to the scholarship fund for architecture students. Dad would have wanted that. A clean break, an honorable rebuilding." Ara slipped her arm through mine. "It's over now, Rowan. Let's go home." I looked back at the house. The porch light flickered, then steadied again, warm and fragile in the falling snow. I realized the light meant something else. That forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just keeps the dark from winning. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The light was still there, a small, stubborn glow fading into the distance. That wasn't the light of a home anymore. It was her final, silent confession, her last attempt to make peace. And as snow blurred the road ahead, I whispered to myself, the anger finally purged and replaced with a quiet strength. "You built your life from fear, Mom. I'll build mine from faith. And when I rebuild, there will be no basement left to hide the truth."